Meriwether Lewis was born August 18, 1774, near Charlottesville, Virginia. He was neighbors with Thomas Jefferson, and he also had no formal education until 13 years of age and would eventually graduate from Liberty Hall in 1793. The same year, he would join the Virginia military and help in the Whiskey Rebellion. In 1795, Lewis joined the U.S. Army, and by 1800, he rose to the rank of captain and ended his service in 1801. He then became the private secretary to Thomas Jefferson on April 1, 1801, which he was later then asked to lead the expedition by Thomas Jefferson. William Clark was born August 1, 1770 in Virginia. Caroline County was where most of Clark's family was involved in the Revolutionary War. Clark and his family would move to Kentucky and would teach him wilderness survival skills. In 1789, Clark would join a volunteer military at 19 years old. From then on, he would enlist in the Army and achieve ranks of captain and lieutenant. On July 4, 1796, Clark would retire because of poor health at age 26. He then moved to Mulberry Hill, a plantation his family owned near Louisville. Thomas Jefferson, who was in office from March 4, 1801 to March 4, 1809, was greatly remembered for writing the Declaration of Independence and the Louisiana Purchase, among other things. In 1800, Napoleon Bonaparte had regained control of the Louisiana Territory. He'd hoped to establish an empire in North America. This would fail, and so he decided to sell the land to the United States. Jefferson had sent James Monroe and Robert R. Livingston to Paris to negotiate the purchase of New Orleans in January 1803. They were to purchase New Orleans and surroundings, but they didn't anticipate the larger deal they would get instead. What they received was land stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, which doubled the size of the United States. The total cost would be $15 million, which would be $237 million in today's money. The purchase was seen as unconstitutional, but Jefferson said that his constitutional power to negotiate treaties allowed the purchase.
Jefferson had been trying for an expedition to the western frontier since the 1790s. Jefferson and Lewis had been privately planning the expedition. No one was to know about the mission. Jefferson wanted to find a faster trade route to Asia, record the plant and animal life, the geography, establish trade with local Indian tribes, and to gain undiscovered land before the Europeans. Lewis was to get an estimate of the expenses based on a party of 1 officer and 10 men. After adding up all of the resources, it came around to $2,500. On January 18, 1803, Jefferson sent a secret letter to Congress detailing that the expedition was to gain control of fur trade along the Mississippi River. That same year, Jefferson commissioned a Corps of Discovery, naming Lewis the leader, and Lewis would name his good friend Clark second in command. Even before the expedition had been approved by Congress, Jefferson had Lewis study and train in many fields for the journey ahead. Lewis and Clark would meet near Louisville, Kentucky in October 1803. Clark had recruited 7 men and Lewis came with 2. These men would be known in Kentucky as the 9 Young Men. They were to establish trade and U.S. sovereignty over the native peoples along the Missouri River, also to gain claim to the Pacific Northwest and Oregon Territory by having American presence before the Europeans. Jefferson just really wanted a water route to the Pacific and for commerce.
The expedition officially began from Camp Wood outside St. Louis in the summer of 1804. From summer to fall, the group would travel upstream northwest of the Missouri River. One of the first encounters with Native American tribes came in Iowa, where the party met the Lakota Nation, or better known as the Sioux, who were said to be a violent territorial tribe. This would lead to many arguments and near-death confrontations between the two groups. Both sides would back out of conflict and the expedition would continue. During the winter in North Dakota, they'd set up camp and build Fort Mandan. In the spring of 1805, Lewis and Clark set off to continue the mission. They ended up in Three Forks, Montana. They'd take the Jefferson River westward. Here they would meet up with the Shoshone Indians, during which they would interview locals to find an interpreter or guide for the expedition. They would choose a French trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau. The reason for this was because his wife spoke Shoshone. Her name was Sacagawea. It was here that Sacagawea would prove to be a valuable asset to the Corps of Discovery. She would negotiate with the Shoshan to trade with the explorers to obtain horses. The Shoshan would agree as well as provide guides to help them traverse over the Rocky Mountains.
After getting over the mountains, the party would sail down the Columbia River all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Near the mouth of the river and in the Oregon Territory, they would construct Fort Clatsop. It was for shelter and protection, but also a sign of American presence in the territory. The Corps of Discovery decided to stay there for the winter. Lewis would spend the winter writing much of the discoveries they found along the journey. On March 23, 1806, the expedition was set to return to the U.S. Using canoes to go up the Columbia River, then travel by foot to Camp Chopinish in Idaho. The Corps would have to wait to cross the Bitterroot Mountains due to snow. While waiting, Lewis's dog was stolen by Indians. They would retrieve it, and Lewis warned the Indian chief that if something were to occur again, there would be bloodshed. On July 3rd, before crossing the Continental Divide, the group would split up. This was because Lewis wanted to explore the Marias River. Lewis and his 4 men had a deadly encounter with the Blackfeet Nation, resulting in 2 Blackfeet deaths and causing the group to flee for over 100 miles. Clark had gone through Crow tribe territory, and in one night half of the horses disappeared. The 2 groups would reunite at the Yellowstone and Missouri rivers on August 11th. Lewis would be shot by one of Clark's hunters for being mistaken for an elk. Now that they were together, the party would take the Missouri River to reach St. Louis September 23, 1806. Now that the Corps of Discovery was back, their mission was deemed a success. Lewis had recorded much scientific data on plants and animal life as well as mapping out the geography of the lands they came across. Along with this, they were able to establish an American presence in the Northwestern Territory. They also successfully established diplomatic relations with many Indian tribes. This was thanks in large part to Sacagawea. While many historical writings indicate her as a guide in the journey, this is just a small part she played in a much larger role in the Lewis and Clark expedition. She served more as an excellent symbol of peace when Lewis and Clark came across Indian tribes. The sight of a woman and infant child gave the impression of a peaceful mission. Sacagawea had given birth to her son Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau on February 11, 1805. The explorers had avoided starvation because of Sacagawea's ability to trade with Indian tribes. It wasn't until 2 months after the journey Jefferson would give a speech on the success and justification for such an expedition. The discoveries of the expedition would lead future men to do the same. The Lewis and Clark expedition has a much larger impact on U.S. history than most would expect. It was because of this journey we had most of the northwestern states and vast knowledge of the environment and the many Native American tribes who populated the area. It showed a characteristic that is within the American spirit, the desire to break beyond the limits of the known and dive into the unknown. To not be settled with what we have, but to hunger for the knowledge and challenge to push ourselves. Lewis and Clark's trek across America would soon be followed by Manifest Destiny, when Americans had a religious duty to push past the western frontier and expand. That characteristic has reverberated throughout U.S. history, just as recent as space exploration, just to solidify the fact that we want to advance past the final frontier, that there is no limit to the American ability and the human race as a whole. We as humans wish to explore the unknown, exchange with the environment, and encounter new things. This has been shown since the dawn of man and continues to be a part of why we advance and grow as a civilization.